Up next, an interview with Apollo 7 astronaut Walter Cunningham.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
If the truth were known, we really delayed this launch so we could get the burritos on time.
I figured that. The flight director says get back in.
We lost the flight plan out the window.
On all three networks, you replaced all the kitty cartoons.
Houston, we've had a problem.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
I was rolling on the moon one day.
Challenger, go and throttle up. Challenger, go and throttle up.
The Earth from here is a grand oasis of the big vastness of space.
You're listening to The Space Program, NASA's past, present, and future.
An interview with Apollo 7 astronaut Walter Cunningham. This is Rich Kirshner reporting. Apollo 7 was the first mission to fly after the Apollo 1 tragic fire that killed the 3 astronauts on that mission. The mission was to test out flight systems, orbit the Earth. They achieved rendezvous and docking with the S-4B second stage as a practice run for future extraction of lunar modules on the way to the moon. The Apollo 7 mission took place in October of 1968. We are now joined by Walter Cunningham. You were in the first Apollo mission to fly after the Apollo 1 crew perished on the pad during training. How did you hear of their fate?
Well, that's a pretty good question, and the answer is going to surprise you, because they were on Apollo 1, and we were training as a crew on Apollo 2 for 7 months, and it was the first time that Apollo astronauts had been practically living at North American out in Los Angeles area. And all kinds of changes we were making in the spacecraft that they were developing. It was not done. It was still getting developed. And so we got to the point where we participated in system reviews and any aspect of it, testing a piece of hardware when it was done. So we were growing up with the hardware at the same time. And we got behind so far on the schedule, they canceled Apollo 2. And when they canceled Apollo 2, which was an identical spacecraft to Apollo 1, and then after that there'd been some other kind of changes they were making too. But we became then the backup crew on Apollo 1. So we were the backup crew on Apollo 1 for about 3 months, and that's when Ed White and Roger Chaffee and the commander was Gus Grissom. But we had been doing that same test the afternoon before. The crews worked very close together all the time, really. But the day before, we had done the test, but without the hatch being closed and operating on internal power. We'd done the thing with the external power so that the cable that plugs in is through the hatch that's not closed. And went just fine, but we knew the next test was going to be more important because just to see how it operated with the hatch closed and on internal power, not external power. So we were waiting to fly back with Grissom and White and Chaffee and working on other things on Friday. That was their day. And when it got down to like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then they were still having trouble with it, it had been sealed up for hours, and they were having trouble getting the communications up enough, and they could not really perform the test until finally they got onto the test, and that's what led to the fire. But about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we decided we would just fly back ourselves. Well, we did. We flew back to Ellington Field in Texas. And while we were there, and just getting out of the airplane, out comes the head of our aviation department there, And we thought, uh-oh, and that was right. They were reporting that the crew had just died in the fire on the pad. And it was very unusual and fatal in about 20 seconds, maybe 25 seconds. So we participated a bit with the getting them ready for the services and things like that. For example, the next morning I had to fly T-38 down there and take Gus Grissom's uniform so that they would be able to put him in that when they sent him out. And it took about 3 weeks before they decided they appointed us to replace that crew. It ended up being called Apollo 7, but it was just because that was consistent with the numbering on it, and there was a fight going on about what it was going to be called back when Gus died in Apollo 1. But so Apollo 7 was the first manned Apollo mission, and we were on that crew.
And the pure oxygen really contributed to that fire going so rapidly.
Well, it was very significant factor because every spacecraft up until that time had been operating on pure oxygen. We still continued to operate in orbit. They were all on pure oxygen. But the problem is for them, when you're in orbit, you're operating on pure oxygen, and it's 5 psi, 5 pounds per square inch. When they closed the hatch and operated on 100% oxygen, therefore the Apollo 1, you had to get the pressure up, to close the hatch, keep the hatch closed and all of that. So they were operating 100% oxygen at about 15 psi.
Oh my!
So after it didn't take too long, but after a couple of hours in there, everything was soaked, 100% oxygen. Anybody that knows about oxygen knows what it contributes to a fire. And there was a spark. The systems around there were not all that perfected yet, and they got a spark. They haven't been able to pin down exactly where it is. They know the cause, but couldn't pick the exact spot on it. And what that did, though, is that when they had the fire and they started recovering from it, just a couple of weeks later, we were then moved up to the prime crew on Apollo 7. But as a result of the accident, we had a whole lot more leverage dealing with the contractors than we did before. They quit complaining about our various suggested changes, improvements, and what have you. In fact, by the time our flight flew, it was 19 months later. Let's see, was that right? End of January and October. It was 21 months later. And when we flew, we had made about 1,040 changes to the spacecraft. Now, only a handful of those are what I would call critical or huge or significant. And a lot of them were things that we'd been trying to do for Apollo 1 and had not had the leverage to get it done. And we got all those things done. The real conclusion is that when we flew that spacecraft in orbit, it went for 11 days. And it was going so well that they added 4 more objectives even while we were in orbit, so it was declared 101% successful when we got back. And the thing about it that to this day, most of them don't think about it, but it was the longest, most ambitious, most successful first test flight of any flying machine ever. And that's still true today, 50 years later.
Well, you knocked out my second question about describing the process of the redesign of your capsule. Actually, were there any significant redesigns on your capsule other than the hatch to get out? Because Apollo 1's hatch required, from what I understand, you had to actually pretty much get a crowbar to it to get out, and you had a handle.
Well, you had to, it was because of the difference in pressure. It had a positive pressure differential from inside to the outside, and it was a hatch that you pulled off inside, and that was the engineering design that would be safer than a hatch that might be able to blow off from the outside. And so they had stuck it to that. But they didn't start with a hatch opening to the outside just as a result of that, because that had been going on. In fact, we were already, when we got our spacecraft, I can't remember the number on that one now, but the spacecraft that we had for Apollo 7, the public today likes to think that was when they decided to invent an outward opening hatch. Not the case. It had already been designed, developed, and installed on it. It hadn't been all that tested and everything. And so we were fortunate to have that difference. And so that worked out, very fine for us.
We're speaking with Apollo 7 astronaut Walter Cunningham. Now, this is almost not a fair question just because of the delay in your mission, but how many hours did you train for your mission? Or maybe on a weekly basis would be a better idea.
Oh, boy, what a question. Because we not only trained for the mission, we were part of the design, we were part of the reviews, part of making the changes. We worked sometimes 24 hours a day. Frank Boren and I were willing to do that at the contractors. And we have been training we've been training on equipment. You do that before you even get a crew assignment. After we got the first crew assignment there on Apollo 2, it was all part of the same project in there. They had to change the spacecraft because we destroyed that one, and they used the second one there to start analyzing that fire that they'd had. But we'd been training before Apollo 1 went, I guess maybe 15 months, maybe 14 months, we've been training as a crew, Wally Schirra, Don Isley, and I. And we were also training and working because we didn't have simulators really ready at that time. Even when we finally flew, we'd only got about 75 hours in the simulator because they were still building them. But we trained for, let's say, 13 months before the Apollo 1 fire. We trained then for the first mission, and that was 21 months later. So it's like almost 3 years they were solidly training for that. Now, you still do other things too, and you don't train just 8 hours a day. It's a totally different program today than it was then. So sometimes we were 24 hours a day, and we were training all over the country, Florida, Houston, Los Angeles, and we were flying our T-38s, which we didn't mind doing, but in 1 week you could be at all three of those locations. You tried to avoid that because you were having to work your tail off traveling more than just on the spacecraft. So it's hard for people to understand and accept that we were different 50 years ago than they are today. And as a matter of fact, with our capabilities, fighter planes and test pilots, most of the guys at that time were test pilots, that we expected this. We were doing that. We were willing to stick our necks out to get ahead in the world. That whole atmosphere has kind of changed today, and many of us might not even, in fact, probably would not even get selected today because they take scientists in a variety of different fields, and they're along for the ride, and it truly is a ride. The Russians have been, their people, their crew members have been essentially just plugged-in passengers now for 50 years, or more than that, 60 years. And so it takes different people today for expertise, and they've got some good scientists that are along for the ride 6 months at a time. it's changed.
Yeah, I'm sure it has. There were height constraints and such things in your day, and now they're basically looking for folks with massive education and all that versus
Yes.
being, fighter qualified. You were the first three-man crew to go up. How
Yes.
crowded was the spacecraft?
Well, it was. We saw it as a lot of space. When we were in the sitting in our couches together, like for launch and other things and other activities during the mission too. But if we were in our spacesuits, we were right up against each other, shoulder to shoulder, and it was sometimes kind of hard moving around. But if you were out of your spacesuits and sitting there, it seemed like a lot of room. And that's been our philosophy here in the U.S. ever since that time. On all of our spacecraft, they have enough room. Now the Russians, right now, for example, we pay them $80 million a passenger to ride in their Soyuz, and they can't really move hardly at all in that spacecraft because it's so close and tight for three people. And rarely do they have to really do something in there because it's an automated machine that goes up and docks and they ride back in it the same way. So it's a different kind of philosophy, and theirs is still consistently working, and our technology has been ahead of theirs now ever since the end of the Gemini program, but we've become dependent on the Russians to even get there. So the world is changing.
And that's a very frustrating thing as far as I consider the space program as being the crown jewel of our country. And it's been, the best word to say is neutered.
Yes, I think you're right. It has been neutered on that. That's a shame. They've had a number of different kind of projects that they started, spent a lot of money on, and then canceled it before they got a chance to fly that one and go on to something else. Whether we like it or not, our culture and our society has changed.
You're listening to the Space Program.
We're speaking with Apollo 7 astronaut Walter Cunningham. Walt, I just got a couple more for you, and then we'll sign off.
Okay.
Now, this one has interested me for years. Your crew decided not to wear pressure helmets during the reentry. How was that decision made?
Well, at least you didn't start off with a question that we all had colds.
Well, I was hoping that you would qualify that answer with...
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll have to tell you, Wally Schirra, the commander, had a cold. And he started noticing, we started noticing it, almost right after we were in orbit. And we knew why, because we'd done some illegal hunting 5 days before in the Florida area, and it was cold. And in fact, Don Isley and I, we had unofficially, I would say, taken some cold pills, and in fact, I was off the base there and got a shot just in case. Anyhow, we get in orbit. Wally showed his cold. He didn't do that like we did, and so he's a bit irritated because of that. But he started taking pills we had on board, and when he took the pills, he made us take the pills too, and he communicated to the ground that we all had a cold. I don't think he didn't come out and just make an outright lie about it, but he left that impression that it was created. And most of the people today, well, maybe I can't say most of the people, but it's very much believed today, especially with the public. Now, there are also some people from the mission control back in those days who know that definitely I didn't have a cold. Don Isley, he may have coughed a little bit. He never had a cold really either, but we all took the pills. And that created some problems with the ground for Wally. And leading up to that particular problem, if you will, is that Wally was a captain in the United States Navy at that time, father had been an admiral, and his grandfather had been an admiral in the Navy, and he was maintaining the position, just like they had, that the commander of the ship is in charge of everything, even if there's other people on board or trying to get involved with that ship. The captain of the ship is the one that decides everything. So when they started having disagreements between the ground and Wally, Wally was pursuing his belief and his philosophy that he's the one in charge. And they've had some things back and forth and caused some irritation, if you will. When it came back time to the reentry, everybody was scheduled to put on their flight suits and their helmets in case there was some problem, depressurizing or something coming in. And Wally wanted to make sure he could clear his head if he had to. So he wasn't going to wear a helmet, and he insisted that we not wear a helmet either, and this caused a big problem with the ground. But after that, Apollo 8 and then all that time, they never wore the helmet during reentry.
Oh, that's interesting. And the procedure, I think, if I read it correctly, is called a Valsalva, where you basically close your nose and try to breathe out.
Oh, yeah, that was to try to clear your head, and that's why Wally wanted to do it. He wanted to be able to get to his nose and do that. But it worked out just fine for us, and they decided that from then on they wouldn't have to put those pressure suits on for reentry. But that's not what the world remembers about it. They remember the fight that went on.
That's why I asked you the question, Walt. Well, I could ask you questions all day because you're full of information. And let me ask you, you authored a book, The All-American Boys, which you've told me that is still selling to this day. And have you considered writing another book?
Well, I wrote that book 41 years ago. It took me 3.5 years. Well, it took me maybe a little less than that, but to get it published took 3.5 years. And it is still selling 41 years after I wrote The All-American Boys. And people still love the book. And the reason they do is because it brings out the truth on things. It also caused me to have some kind of social problems with some of the guys because I was so candid and honest. But that's kind of the negative side. I also did the audio book. I did that myself. It took me 3.5 months to do that. And the audio book is, I don't know kind of how that does. But they're still selling The All-American Boys. And I was being candid on it, and it's considered that one and Carrying the Fire with Mike Collins considering the best one or two books ever written on the space program. There's also another book, one of the shuttle guys, can't remember his name, but he liked The All-American Boys, and he talked with me about doing some of those things, and he wrote a candid book too. And that's got pluses and minuses, whether we like it or not.
Well, sure. I mean, history will be what it is, and people will write what they want as far as covering you folks, from the media aspect and such. But I find the most interesting information is weird questions that I like to ask, whereas the average media person will ask, how do you go to the bathroom in space? Well, we don't care. It doesn't matter. I want to know some of the backstories, like John Young taking the sandwich up in the second Gemini mission, things like that. Yeah. Actually, it was the first one, but no, hearing this information is great. And, being candid, there's nothing wrong with that. And if somebody gets their feelings hurt when the truth is told on a stupid thing, I have never heard this thing about you guys going on a hunting trip. I mean, that's fascinating to me. It's stuff we don't hear, and that's why It's just a really great pleasure to speak with you and hear these stories from the horse's mouth.
Okay.
Do you have any upcoming activities, anything that you would like to promote before we sign off?
Well, yes, I am very busy because it's the 50th anniversary last Friday at 10 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning, we lifted off. And people are paying attention to that. This week, for example, at the Frontiers of Flight Museum in Dallas, we're having a 50th anniversary celebration down there at that museum. A lot of astronauts from Apollo that are still alive are going to be there. I think maybe we got, well, I'm just guessing about 8 of them or something like that. But it's hard to keep up with the schedule at this stage in our lives. We're all older, and the public at large is trying to have something to remember about it. They know that we're all going to be gone, very shortly. But in my opinion, that was the accomplishment of the 20th century. Not even the 20th century. I believe that 500 years from now, there's only going to be one thing that the public remembers about this century, and that's that man went to the moon and stuck his neck out. We pushed the boundaries, and I'm just proud to have had a very small part in it.
Well, I will use a phrase that you've coined, the golden age of space travel.
Oh, yes, it was the golden age. Well, I was just going to say, they can find out what it was really like just reading my book, The All-American Boys. I was going to leave you with one more thought.
Sure. That
you can look into, because they've been asking me questions about the mission when I had time to do it for the last 50 years. And I can tell you this, that back in those days especially, today not so much, the questions that almost everybody wanted to know, and usually somebody would ask them right away. One is they would ask, were you afraid? And there was some other one in there, and then they're trying to get themselves to the feeling of friendliness so they could ask, how do you go to the bathroom in space?
Right.
That's the way it is.
All right, Colonel. I'll sign off with you now. You have a wonderful day. My best to your family and all your loved ones. And thank you again.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Keep doing good work.
Thank you very much, sir. An interview with Apollo 7 astronaut Walter Cunningham. This is Rich Kirshner reporting.
From the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, and God bless all of you on the good earth.
This has been the Space Program, NASA's past, present, and future.